on this moment and expect your happiness to last, 'cause the illusions dwell in the past. And every time you start wanting or trying to be free, the mind is ever knowing that one can only be. If you're looking, you'll never find. Don't try to keep up or you'll be left behind. The joke is over. Take a look at the end and begin again. 'Cause everything has been here for you. It's all been at your hand. But don't try to build a new world. Just learn to live on the land. Come on back to God's hand. 'Cause you are what you look at. This old world you can't be. Just give yourself up to your love. Give your love to be free. Go on, give your love to be free. Go on, give your love to be free.
This podcast assumes that you have a general knowledge of the Tate LaBianca murders. Sharon Tate Polanski, Jay Sebring, Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail Folger, and Stephen Parent were murdered on Cielo Drive in Los Angeles on August 9, 1969. Lena and Rosemary LaBianca were slain in their Los Feliz residence the following night. Charles Manson, Charles Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Quenwinkle, and Leslie Van Houten were convicted of those murders. Say hello to the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast. Hi, I'm George Stimson. Welcome again to the second live broadcast of the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast. This time I'm going to do it for real. I want to apologize for last night's snafu. I apparently didn't push enough buttons I had to get on the air, so I was broadcasting to an audience of just myself. It won't happen again unless it happens tonight. Okay, now getting to tonight, I'm glad you're all here listening and watching. I don't have a guest tonight, so what I'm going to do is an examination of some more of the evidence in this murder case, and specifically, I'm going to try to answer one of the most puzzling questions about the crime scene at 10,050 Cielo Drive. And that question is, if Sharon Tate Polanski and Jay Sebring were subdued and killed in the living room, how did their blood get on the front porch area of the house? And we're going to try to answer that question tonight. In answering it, we're going to have to look at the evidence, because that's what we always do on these podcasts. We look at evidence, not what people say, not what people think, not what people suppose, what we know, physical evidence. And in this case, that evidence is the bodies of the victims. So the bodies, the blood, and the wounds are all evidence. If it seems like we're getting a little callous when we're talking about the people, a little clinical, and the conversation gets a little grim, we're not trying to downplay the reality of the victims, but in this instance, their bodies are just pieces of evidence, and so we're going to look at them like that. And so the conversation might get a little casual. And finally, I want to say that since I'm live tonight, I do have some notes that I'll be referring to, because I've got a lot of information to give to you all, and I want to make sure I don't leave anything out. So we're going to start with the blood stains themselves, and we'll get over here, and I have to do all this myself because I don't have an engineer yet. All right. These are the blood stains we're talking about. And And will bring me back in here so we can be live again. There are some other things that work against the moving of the bodies. One is the weight of the bodies. Jay Sebring weighed 122 pounds. Sharon Tate Polanski weighed 136 pounds. They were looped together with a rope. If you looked at the autopsy photos, which you can see online, the ropes are looped around their necks pretty tightly, at least one loop. And so they are connected by those loops. By the eyewitness testimony of both Susan Atkins and Tex Watson, Jay Sebring went down kind of early in the incident. And when he did, he was out of commission. That would have meant he would have been out of commission before he got to the door. And if Sharon Tate Polanski was tied to him, it's unlikely that they could have been moved together or that they could have gotten to the door on their own. So because of the fact that they were tied together, makes it very unlikely that it would be possible for anybody to move the bodies. So there's no blood trail. Furthermore, also going out, there's no blood trail from the living room to the supposed blood on the porch. You have a lot of blood in the living room. You have bodies in the living room. You have a lot of blood in the porch that's supposedly from those same bodies. If you had a massive amount of blood in the living room and a massive amount of blood in the porch, if those people were bleeding that amount as appears on the porch, you would expect there to be a lot of blood between the living room and the porch, and there is not. So if the bodies were not moved after death, which I think the evidence of the lividity shows pretty clearly, the blood must have gotten on the porch some other way. So that leaves us with the second option of how the blood got there. And that is the theory that Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring met the killers at the front door, opened the house to them, and some altercations started there, some conflict, and knives were drawn, and people got cut on the front door, bled profusely, apparently, according to that picture of the blood pool. And then they went back into the living room where they were eventually killed. Now, that theory is helped along by the very helpful Tex Watson, who testified at his murder trial that he did, in fact, walk in the front door. He said, "Did you cut the screen?" "No, you entered through the front door. Is that right?" "The best I can recall, that's the way I entered." "Did you knock on the door, Tex, ring the doorbell or anything like that?" "I just walked in, I believe." Now, Tex, of course, is very helpful. Linda Kasabian says that he cut the screen and went in the dining room window. Susan Atkins says he cut the screen and went in the dining room window. Tex Watson, Charles Watson, later says himself that he cut the screen and went in the dining room window. And of course, there is this picture of the screen cut outside the dining room window. So I think unless the killers went in the front door and someone else went in the dining room window, maybe it was Reeve Whitson went in the next morning and called the photographer. I don't know. But to me, the evidence indicates that they went in through the dining room window and that there was no incident at the front door. So that doesn't explain how the blood could be at the front door with the two people being there if they weren't. And similarly, as with the blood coming from the living room to the porch, if they were attacked at the front porch with such ferocity that it would leave a pool of blood that big, there would be a huge trail of blood going back into the living room where their bodies were found, and there isn't one. So that kind of puts the damper on that theory that that's the sequence of events. So there was no meeting and attack on the door. And so if the moved bodies or an attack on the doorway don't account for the blood being there, what other possible explanation can there be? Well, if you want to read about the blood evidence at the Cielo Drive scene, I recommend you go to the MF blog. They have an excellent article on there that Dave the lawyer wrote, and it's full of details. If you want to find it, you can go in the MF blog on the main page. They have an index, and go look on the right under Manuel Granado. It's the only entry for him, and it's under M, not G, because for some reason the index entries on the MF blog start with the first letter of the entry or the name. So let's see. Dave's article is very complex. It's kind of mind-numbing in its detail. It's very long. He covers every possible explanation, including the fact that or the possibility rather, that the people testing the blood made errors, and that might account for the fact that blood's here when the person wasn't there, or he even accounts for that, and he goes into it in fairly good detail, and with the conclusion that it's not likely that enough errors could have been made to have a mistaken blood type on the front porch for Sharon Tate Polanski and Jay Sebring. However, as we will see, there are a lot of questions about the blood testing that were done on Cielo Drive that morning. There, Steve, let me see. Dave came up with 7 relevant blood samples that were relevant to finding the blood on the front porch. Sharon Tate Polanski had type OM blood, and her blood was found in the writing of the word pig. There were front porch splatters. Let me get back here with you. There were front porch splatters. There was a footprint on the front porch in her blood type. A rope around her neck doesn't concern us here. There was a blood on the doorway between the entry and the living room, and on the left side of the front door jamb, and the other 2 were on towels in the living room, which don't really concern us. So you've got her blood splattered around the front door and on the door jamb, and a bloody footprint. Now, Jay Sebring's blood was type OM. His blood was found on the steamer trunks between the living room and the front door that were knocked open. They were found on the gun grip that broke off the buntline revolver when Charles Watson was beating Wojciech Frykowski over the head with it. Sebring's blood was found on the walkway. And interestingly and amazingly, Sebring's blood was found on the gate opening button out by the gate. So that gives you an idea of how far blood can travel, because that's quite a distance to go for a blood transfer. Wojciech Frykowski had B-type blood, and what's interesting is that his blood was found apparently, or at least identified on the front porch, nowhere. Now, I'm going to come back to that because that's a very puzzling thing, that they didn't find any of Wojciech Frykowski's blood on the front porch. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this pool here. Here's another picture of the blood stain. Now you can see here, if you look over on the left-hand side, there's a big, fairly big blood spot, not the big dark one, but down below that. And you can see there's a circle where it's marked OMN. And that's where I believe Vincent Bugliosi had Granato mark where he typed Jay Sebring's blood at the trial. So if you look there at that spot, you can see that there are little droplets in the main pool of blood. So we don't know. Unfortunately, we can't talk to Granato. We can't talk to him about the cord from Jay Sebring's house, and we can't talk to him about his blood sampling technique. So unfortunately, 50 years after the crime, there are a lot of things that we're not going to be able to just ask people to explain. We're going to have to try to determine it by looking at evidence and coming to our own conclusions. And that's what we're trying to do here with the blood evidence, because blood evidence doesn't change. You don't forget things. It's there. It's pretty solid. It's pretty good evidence. It's there. It's physical. Okay. Now, David, the lawyer from the MF blog article, was satisfied that Jay's blood was on the porch because when Tex Watson chased Wojciech out of the house, he had a dripping knife and blood dripping off his body, and that fits with the what we know about the steamer trunks in the front foyer. They were knocked over, and as you look right there, you can see 2 blood drops on that top trunk. They're going downward, and they're going in the direction of the front door. So those would be 2 blood drops that came off of a person who was moving towards the front door. They hit the trunks, and they're going down at a slight angle towards the front door. So that gives you the direction that the person was traveling when the blood dripped off them, towards the front door, dripping Jay Sebring's blood on the trunks. Dripping, that's not something that came out of a wound. That's a drip from a knife or an arm or something like that. So again, you've got the blood of Jay Sebring on the trunks. You've got him on the doorway between the entry and the living room, the left side of the front door. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going back to Sharon Tate Polanski. Let's see. Okay, you've got the gun hand grip is another connection between Jay Sebring and Wojciech Frykowski. On the walkway and even on the gate button, as I mentioned before, as far away as that was Jay Sebring's blood. And nobody, to my uh, knowledge, has ever suggested that Jay Sebring was out at the gate button at any time during that evening. So um, let's see. That takes it as far as Sharon Tate Belansky in the article in the MF blog. The author comes to a different conclusion about why her blood was on the front porch than I do, because his explanation has Sharon Tate Belansky on the front porch, and my explanation does not. Now, we've gone over this again, that there was a lot of blood involved in these murders, very bloody, a lot of stab wounds, a lot of energy, a lot of people moving around frantically, motion, adrenaline pumping, hearts beating fast, blood everywhere. Uh, there was blood dripping all over the residence. There was blood on the gate button. There was blood on the people when they stopped at Rudolph Weber's to use the hose. There was blood on the car when they stopped at a gas station on the way home, and there was still blood on the car when they got back to Spahn's Ranch. A lot of blood. So then we want to know where does all this blood come from specifically? So getting back to the evidence of the bodies and the blood and the wounds, we look at Sharon Tate Belansky. She was stabbed 16 times, but of interest to us are three wounds basically that penetrated her heart. And I don't want to go into the detail of the wounds because it's not really necessary. All you have to know is she was stabbed in the heart 3 times. Uh, Jay Sebring's autopsy report, he was stabbed in the aorta. And as you know, that's the main artery coming off the heart. So anybody stabbed in the aorta is pretty much done for, and they're also bleeding profusely. Wojciech Frykowski was stabbed. He stabbed penetrating the left lung, causing massive hemorrhaging. And so that's what multiple stab wounds causing massive hemorrhaging was the cause of his death. So you've got Sharon Tate Belansky, Jay Sebring, and Wojciech Frykowski all putting out an awful lot of blood. Now, when you talk about how much blood exactly, the heart holds 9.47 ounces of blood. That's a little over a quart, a little over a cup, almost a cup and a quarter. The amount of blood that the heart pumps per beat is about 2 1/3 ounces. So maybe 3.5 heartbeats, and so you've put out a cup, maybe a little more. The heart's pumped a cup of blood. So where would the blood go if you're stabbing people in the heart? They're bleeding extensively. How much blood would be on you? How much would drip? How far would it drip? And most importantly, for our question here, how far would it be possible for the blood of Sharon Tate Belansky to drip? So again, David, the lawyer, in his article in the MF blog, concluded that Jay Sebring's blood was spread by cast off, and that's reasonable considering the trunk splatters and the fact that the blood was found as far away as the gate button. So, but Sharon Tate Belansky, we don't know, or he doesn't offer. He offers an explanation, but it's not one that I offered. So I was curious as to how far her blood would drip, and to do so, I decided to do an experiment. And to do that experiment, I went online and I found a recipe for fake blood. And there it is. 3/4 cups of corn syrup, 1/4 cup of water, a half teaspoon of red food coloring. There's other food coloring to make it more authentic, but I left those two out, and a tablespoon of cornstarch. So you get all those ingredients together, which is what I did, and I put them in a bowl and I mixed them up. And it was an interesting experiment to start. Luckily, I was able to find a friend who would help me do this. And then once I got the blood formula mixed, I proceeded with my experiment. But before I did that, I had to calculate the distances involved. And to calculate those distances, I went back to this diagram of the Cielo Drive residence. You can see there the bodies, the couch up in the Sebring and Belansky bodies, the doorway down on the lower right. So in order to calculate the distances, I took the length of the couch. I figured it was a pretty big couch, so it was probably 90 inches long. So then I took that 90-inch different distance, of the length of the couch rather, and extrapolated it out a route going out to the front door. Now, 4 times 90, you can do the math, but that point where the bottom red bar ends at the bottom is 30, let's see, that's 30 feet. Okay, 30 feet from the Polanski's body to being out on the walkway is about 30 feet. So that's what we're looking at, 30 feet. We're going to see how far the blood drips. And we'll go down here and we'll show you the demonstration. Now I laid out a 30-foot tape on the driveway. Here we go. Now I didn't have any help doing this. I wish I'd had somebody to pour this over me, but believe me, I was lucky to get somebody to film this. So I've got 2 cups of artificial blood in that red container. I'm pouring it over my cells and the knife. It's all over the place, no help, sloppy. I really need some assistance to do this right. So I poured it over myself and I started walking 30 feet. Now, as you can see, and you can see it better when you blow this up, I'm dripping quite a bit behind me, especially from the right hand where the knife is. Walking down the thing 30 feet to the end of the tape, I turn around and I stop and I stand there. And I don't know if you can still see there, there's still blood dripping off my finger, the left hand down by my left foot. Now we're going to go a little further here. I wanted to show some more of this dripping. And of course, Cinnamon had to get into the shot, but try not to look at her too much. If you can still see that the blood's dripping off my left hand, and say, that's that. So that having happened, this is what it looked like at the ends. We had some blood splatters here. You can see the end of the tape there coming out about 2 feet from there. There's a blood splatter there. There's a blood splatter there. When you look at them closer, you can see quite a few blood drips in that spot right there, and quite a few blood drips right there from just standing there for a few seconds holding the knife and having blood dripping off the knife and off my arm. So now again, that's 34 feet, and we calculated roughly from the couch to the front door would be 30 feet. So whoever did it would have stopped earlier. There would have been more dripping, obviously, back if you didn't go the additional 4, 5, 6 feet. So now that's my test. And to me, it proved that blood would drip from the Sharon Tate's body to the front door. Now, of course, there are some cons to this test, and I'll go over those right now. The main con is that it wasn't real blood, but it did show that a blood of a similar blood type material would drip that far. Granted, it was not real human blood. I didn't really have the option to get a pint of human blood, and there's some of the other methods of getting it I didn't think would be worth doing. So not real blood, I will concede that. Another difference, when we did that test, it was 57 degrees. It wasn't about 85 or whatever it was on the night of August 9th, 1969. Another thing, we didn't heat the blood up to body temperature, so it wasn't 90 degrees, it was probably 50, so that might have affected the viscosity. The gravel driveway was not the best medium to be walking over and dropping blood drops on to get an accurate marking of how far they went. A lot of them got absorbed in the dirt right away. I didn't really want to do it out on the street, so we had to do it on the driveway. But as you can see, there was still blood dripping when I got to the end of the 34 feet. Now, those are the cons of the blood test. On the other hand, it's very likely that Charles Watson had more blood on him than 1 cup. I would say perhaps he had maybe even 2 cups on him. So we don't know. Another way that blood could have gotten to the front door, besides Charles Watson carrying it there are other people there, don't forget. Susan Atkins was there, present at the time too, and she recalls that after she wrote pig on the door in Sharon Tate Polanski's blood, she stood around the front door area for a few minutes, and we don't know how much blood that she dripped when she did that. So from the getting back to the thing here, we're looking at this blood thing. How much of this blood, and we're talking about drips, not a pool. We're getting drips there. This is a pool of blood, okay? And you can see from the blood investigation report that the blood residue from Sharon Tate Polanski on the front porch were front porch splatters, not a pool of blood. So Jay Sebring's blood on the front porch near the human on the trunk, splatters near the front door. Again, not a pool of blood. Twice on the porch, not a pool. The walkway, and again, the gate opener, very far away. I think we can rule out. I think we can rather use transfer as a good way for explaining how Jay Sebring's blood got anywhere. If it got to the gate button, it could have gotten anywhere. So what's very interesting to me when I started looking at these blood reports, and they're all in the article in the MF blog, if you want to blow them up and look at them, they can tell you whose blood was found where. Nowhere in any of these reports do they find any blood that can be matched to Wojciech Frykowski. Now, here's a fellow who suffered the most wounds of any of the victims. He's stabbed 51 times, beaten over the head with a gun butt 13 times, shot twice, bleeding quite a bit. And yet none of the blood in the blood report says, like, we didn't find his blood type on the front porch. We didn't find his blood type on the front doorway. We didn't find his blood type anywhere where you would think you would find his blood type, because we know that he went out the front door. We know he was on the front porch. We know he fell into the bushes, and you can see right here that the bushes have clearly been fallen into, and they're messed up a little bit from him lying there bleeding, as what Linda Kasabian said. He came out the door and fell into the bushes and was lying there bleeding from his many stab wounds and leaving a pool of blood. But nowhere, if you look, he had a blood type of B. So did Abigail Folger and Stephen Parent. And the only references to blood type B in the blood report are blood stains found in Steve Parent's car, which are obviously his, blood stains found going down the hallway from the living room out the French doors of the bedroom to the pool, which clearly Abigail Folger's, because that matches the scenario of the crime. But nowhere does it say, oh, we found Wojciech Frykowski's blood in the front door, on the front porch, anywhere. So it's very odd to me that none of the blood was typed of Wojciech Frykowski, and yet so much of it has to be his blood, given the given the amount of wounds he had. Now, I'm not going to say that take the easy way out and say that they just misdid all the blood, because that would be too simple. I'm going to accept the fact that they have the right blood types in the right places where they found them. But I think it's very odd that they don't have anything for Frykowski. And I think it's indicative of how a superficial a job of blood typing they did. I think in all, they took something like 35 samples in this whole crime scene of 5 victims, blood everywhere. They took 35 samples. They can't find any that match with Wojciech Frykowski. And that indicates to me just a little bit of carelessness when it comes to how they were collecting blood. And sure, that they were probably overwhelmed. They didn't know what they were doing. They had so much on their hands on the morning of August 9th. I don't think they knew what to do half the time. They were just picking stuff up and trying to figure out what happened. It was such a shocking scene. So if there's no blood from Wojciech Frykowski, I would wager that they didn't check, and that most of this blood that you see here in this picture is from Wojciech Frykowski when he fell down bleeding massively on the front porch, and that the splatters that you see circled there in the lower sort of center left were blood splatters that they happened to type and pick up the ones of Jay Sebring. Now, you might say that's a coincidence or a lucky break, or something, or a very precise sampling that got that result. But hey, that would explain that result. So as we get to that explains, there's still another thing I found that's interesting. And this is when I was rereading the grand jury testimony of Susan Atkins, December 6th, going over that to get her version of the crime to see what she said happened. I came across this very interesting comment that she made. And she said this. Question: before you went to the ranch, did you stop anywhere? Answer: we stopped at a gas station. What did you do at the gas station? Filled up the car with gas, and I went into the bathroom and checked for any other blood stains. In my fight with Frykowski, I had opened the sores that I had on my feet, and my feet were bleeding and very sore. I wonder what Susan Atkins' blood type was. Because if she was bleeding on the front porch, as she says he was, that would further add confusion to the crime scene. And if she's the same blood type as Sharon Tate Polanski or Jay Sebring, that could clarify a lot of the mystery of how those blood types got onto the front porch. I don't know if anybody has that information. Somebody must, but whether we're ever going to get access to it, I don't know. So I want to recap here. The blood in the body's evidence in this case does not support a scenario where Sharon Tate Polanski and Jay Sebring were attacked in the living room, then taken to the porch over an hour and a half later, and then returned to the living room. That's not possible to have happened given the blood evidence. The evidence does not support a scenario where Sharon Tate Polanski and Jay Sebring greeted and were attacked by killers at the front porch. The evidence does support the scenario where Sharon Tate Polanski and Jay Sebring were subdued and killed in the living room, and their blood got to the front porch by dripping off of the killers and their weapons. That, in turn, supports the accepted narrative of the murders of 10,050 Cielo Drive, wherein the killers and the victims did not know each other, which should rule out any alternate murder scenarios wherein killers and victims were involved in any kind of pre-homicide intrigue. Now, this is a lot of examination about some blood stains and things, and you might wonder, why do you go into such detail about something like this? And the reason you want to look at this blood stain evidence, and in fact, any evidence you can find on this case, should be scrutinized very closely because it's such a complicated case. There are so many different theories, and it's important that we find out what happened. And so the reason that we want to get the detail about what happened in something like this is because if we can discard everything that did not happen, we might be able to come to a reasonable conclusion about what did happen. And so now that we've come to a reasonable and realistic conclusion about the blood at Cielo Drive crime scene, we are left with only one mystery. And that mystery is, how did the towel on Jay Sebring's head get under the rope around his neck?
This has been the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast, the podcast dedicated to the truth about the Tate LaBianca murders, Charles Manson, and more. The views expressed on this program are solely those of the individual speakers, and they do not necessarily represent the thoughts, ideas, or opinions of any other persons, either living or dead. Visit our companion website at www.goodbyehelterskelter.com. There you can find more information about this podcast. Also, check out the Goodbye Helter Skelter Facebook page for information on upcoming programs. And let us know what you think by way of contact@goodbyehelterskelter.com. We will address any comments, questions, or concerns on future installments of the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast.